Baby, when I rule the world. I'll be right back. I'm going to reset my network router, see if there's something going on with the bandwidth, and see if I can fix that. All right. Yeah, it's just coming in really blurry when I'm trying to view it. So, but I just went over to my 5 gigahertz instead of the 2.4. See if that helps. All right. Ooh. I just have a bunch of my students from my college course that were hoping to come in at 2:30, so that's when I'm going to get started. Yeah. All right. All right. Well, looks like it's about that time, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I know I have a couple people watching across a few different streams. I know it's the middle of the day. Unfortunately, I got a bunch of stuff going on tonight, so this is the only time I could actually record this video. Some background on why I'm actually doing this particular setup is that I teach a bunch of different classes for Kaplan. A few of my students, both here and in Udemy and a couple different places, have said, all right, great. So what's the next step? How do I get started, doing software development outside of academia? And, I start asking them, well, what do you want to learn? And it almost always comes down to either mobile app development or web development. And mobile app development, I've done some native Android, I've done some native iOS, but my mic seems to be echoing. Weird. All right, let's see if that fixes it. I just realized that my OBS streamer was piping the sound through, which may have been an issue. So, yeah, absolutely. I can check the connection. Let's see. Doesn't seem to be echoing on my end, but obviously you're having some issues. So, all right, so that's set to mute. Oh, it's better. All right, good. Yeah, I'm still trying to get this set up. I've never done 3 different streams at the same time, so this is kind of a unique challenge. One of my students told me they couldn't get to anything other than YouTube from where they were. So I'm casting this on YouTube. I'm casting it on Live Coders and or Live Coding TV and then Coders TV. So, all right. So, anyways, but by and large, most want to get into web development. They ask, what can I do? I don't want to. I'm on Windows or I'm on my OS 10 machine, but I don't know how to set it up. And I've always been of the opinion that if you don't have to screw up your native OS, then you probably shouldn't. If you can avoid that and just kind of focus in on, getting your tool set up in a way that doesn't have any lasting impact, it's even better. Now, there's a lot of newer technologies out there. Yeah, I'm TriCasting right now. There's a lot of technologies out there, such as containers like Docker, which I use a lot, but, trying to explain Docker to a brand new software engineer may not always be, especially one that doesn't have any real Linux experience or really any, DevOps experience or systems experience. It can be a little overwhelming. So what I try to do is I try to recommend getting started with something simple like Virtualbox and then going from there and building your development environment there. Now, it's one step in the right direction. Ultimately, you should be using something like Vagrant to build up your virtual boxes so that you can get stuff going. But I understand that's terminology that a lot of my students may not necessarily recognize. So what I'm going to do in this stream is go really simple. Start from the very beginning, talk about what VirtualBox is, what virtualization is, why we would use it, installing Linux in a VirtualBox guest. I'm running Windows 8.1 as my main host operating system on this machine. My actual main development machine is my MacBook Pro, but whenever I do casting, I find that the Windows machine handles it a little better. Probably because it's a desktop rather than a laptop. But anyways, we'll get that machine set up. I'll explain, how you get those ISOs, how you get that all set up. And we'll go through, we'll build the actual machine, we'll install Node.js. We'll talk a little bit about what Node.js is, and then I'll point you in some future resources. So that all being said, what is VirtualBox? Well, VirtualBox is an open source virtualization tool put out by Oracle. It was originally created by Sun, but when Oracle bought Sun, they took it over. VirtualBox did just come out with a 5.0 release. There are some problems with it, especially on like Windows 8.1 hosts. I've read some reports about, networking being shot in some setups, especially if you're migrating older machines. So I recommend you try to stick with VirtualBox 4. I'm using 4.3. I haven't upgraded yet. I'm going to let them shake out some of the issues there before I migrate my stuff over. But VirtualBox is a way of virtualizing an operating system. And what that means is that you've got your host machine that's all set up and it's running its own operating system. And you want to have a virtual machine that kind of fits inside that that host machine. What it does is it lets you essentially run a computer within a computer. It's all software based. It's called virtualized or emulated, depending on how you want to think about it. But what it's doing is it's fooling the guest operating system into thinking that it's its own computer. So what that means is that you can create your own software-based computer. You can install your own operating system, Linux, Windows, whatever makes most sense. You can't technically do OS 10 because of licensing reasons. But I use this a lot for, building whenever I'm working on a new application, whenever I'm working on something that may end up breaking, I tend to nix it out and start up with a new virtual machine. You can also do things like controlling the amount of CPU, amount of memory. You can really fine tune it. Now, I will say that if you are running on a machine that only has, a couple gigs of RAM, it may be fairly resource intensive and it may not be the best experience. I run a few VBox instances on my 8 gig MacBook Pro. I've got 32 gigs on this machine. I don't have an issue, but just keep in mind that if you give that machine 4 gigs, it's probably going to try to take 4 gigs. So keep that in mind. So what we're going to do is we're going to head to virtualbox.org. We're going to download it. Now, as I said, they've got 5.0 up. You probably don't want that. If you come over to downloads, you can, which is actually the default page, you can search around, try to find some of the older VirtualBox instances. I've already got 4.3 installed. I'm going to leave it on there. You may have better luck with 5. The concept should carry over just fine. But you'll download it and you'll install it. It's a very basic, straightforward install. Just select, most of the times you can safely just go with the defaults. It's not going to do anything crazy other than install the VirtualBox system on it. So once you have VirtualBox, that's going to simulate the hardware. What you need now is you need an operating system to run in your virtual computers in your VirtualBox. There's a lot of different options out there. If you're doing .NET, you'll probably want to grab yourself a copy of Windows. If you're doing web, I usually use Linux. My personal preference is Linux Mint. But, a lot of people like Elementary OS. I had problems getting Docker running on Elementary OS, so I kind of went back to Mint. You can use stock Ubuntu. I would say that if it's 3D intensive, like the Unity interface tends to be on Ubuntu, you may want to maybe not put it in VirtualBox. It's really up to you. Play around. That's a nice thing about VirtualBoxes is that you can set them up and shut them right down if you want. So we're going to use Linux Mint for this. And if you just Google it, you come over to Linux Mint, pretty, vanilla looking website. You want to come over to download. If you have a good stable connection, you'll probably want to definitely grab the 64-bit because that's what most of the sources are going to be for. If you have a nice stable connection, you can probably just download it straight through HTTP. You'll see that it's 1.5 gigs. That's why I use torrents. Believe it or not, torrents can be used for perfectly legal purposes, and this is one of them. Streaming large files. Linux is open source, especially things like Linux Mint and Ubuntu-based systems. They tend to be open source. They're free. Torrent is a great, quick way to get that software. If you don't have torrent software on your computer, you might want to look into something like Deluge. A lot of people used to use MicroTorrent or PicoTorrent or any of those really. Most other torrent software that I've seen has kind of converted more to an ad model. They put some weird stuff on your computer. I don't trust that stuff. Yeah, you can, if you're paying attention, you can set it up correctly, but Deluge has been a great tool that I've migrated most of my torrent stuff over to. So I use that almost exclusively. It's free, it's lightweight. You can just install it. And then what you'll do is with your Linux Mint tab open, you want to click on this torrent. It's going to download a torrent file. If you click on that, and you open it in Deluge, it's going to ask you where you want to store it. So it's asking me, hey, here's the file that you're going to download. Where do you want to store it? I've already downloaded it, so I'm not going to add it again. And you'll see that when it's all done, it should crop over to seeding. Seeding means that you are now sharing those bits with others. Other people can now connect to your computer without you really knowing it, without you really paying attention. Not in a bad way, but kind of behind the scenes, and you can give parts of this file to others. When you download it through torrent, that's what you're doing. You're getting different parts of that file from different peers. The more peers that have it, the quicker it can go. It's a lot more efficient than a straight, say, FTP pull. But once it's done, you probably want to right-click and choose Open Folder. Mine downloaded to my Downloads directory. So I've got it right here, Linux Mint 17.1 Cinnamon 64-bit. This icon shows that it's an ISO, which is more like a DVD or CD rip. And so we're going to actually put this into our virtual DVD drive once we set up VirtualBox. So if you open up VirtualBox, you'll see all your machines off to the left. These are the machines that I already created. These are things that I'm working on at this point. I'm going to create a brand new machine. And it's going to ask me for a name and an operating system. Now, the type is more important than the actual version. If you do start typing stuff in, it'll try to kind of guess what you want to use. For example, if I type in Ubuntu, it's going to automatically change the type to Linux and version of Ubuntu 64. I'm just going to go ahead and call this demo because I lack creativity. I'm going to set it as Linux and Ubuntu 64-bit. You can change this as you go on if you need to. It's not a super big deal. The big deal here is the name so that you recognize it. I've once had, 14, 15 different VMs, and a couple of them were like Dev1 and Test2 and stuff like that, and it just wasn't, it wasn't what I wanted. So you hit next, you're going to give it memory. Now, the amount of memory that you give it is going to depend entirely on how much you've got on your machine. Like I said, I've got 32 gigs on this desktop, so I can give it plenty of message. I find the 4 gigs tends to be enough. Again, depends on what you're doing. You're going to want to give it more or less. If you're only running, for example, Ubuntu server with just a very basic, Node.js or Nginx server, you probably get as low as 512 megs. But because I'm going to be doing some GUI, I'm going to be doing Xterm, I'm going to be doing a couple things. Oh, well, I've been teaching at Kaplan University for about 10 years now. So, yeah, so seems just like yesterday. So yeah, no, I'm a professor. So, all right. So 4 gigs of RAM. Again, the more you give it, the slower your host operating system will go if you don't have enough memory. But because I have 32 gigs, this isn't going to put a dent in it. Hard drives. So like I said, when you're doing a VirtualBox, almost any piece of hardware, you're going to write it. There's going to be a software version for it. Hard drive's no different. Now, one of the things about hard drive is that you can use existing hard drives if you have multiple virtual machines, if you want to share the hard drives around back and forth. I tend not to do that. Corruption, you accidentally leave it locked or editing, or you edit a file and didn't expect it. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, but if you're careful, that's fine. What I recommend is just creating a brand new hard drive each time. When you hit create, it's going to ask you which type. Again, unless you really know what you're doing, it's fine to just leave it as a VDI. If you are using something like Parallels or using a different virtualization stack, you may have different requirements. But for most use cases, VDI is going to be fine. This is the big one. This is where people tend to get divided depending on what you're trying to do. If you do a dynamically allocated hard drive, what that means is it's going to give you a specific size and then expand it as it needs up to a maximum. So, for example, if I say give me a 64 gigabyte dynamically allocated hard drive, that means it may only give me like 5 or 6 gigs to start. And then as I start getting closer and closer and closer to that upper limit, it'll expand it out. Now, the problem with that is that if you expand it out, you're going to have some performance issues. You may run into some issues on your host machine if you start running out of space. So there's some complications there. I find the dynamically allocated is generally good enough for me, so I just leave it. If you know that you're definitely going to use, a full 32 gigs and you don't want to deal with dynamically allocated performance issues towards, the upper limits, go ahead and choose fixed size and give it that fixed size. That will slow down the machine building process, primarily because it has to allocate all that space right off the front. But for most development, you'll be fine using dynamically allocated. So hit next. It's going to ask you to name the hard drive and give it a size. If you hit this arrow over here, you can choose exactly where you're going to store your virtual disk, your VDI, virtual disk image. And I'm just going to leave it in the default. It's in my Kevin Virtualbox VMs demo folder, which is fine. That's important if you need to, if you have 128 gig SSD as your main hard drive and then a 2 terabyte drive as a backup. You might probably want to put it on the 2 terabyte rather than eating all your host space. I'm going to go ahead and give it 64 gigs of RAM. Because it's dynamically allocated, it's not going to take 64 gigs of my hard drive, but of my host hard drive, but it'll still be it'll expand up to that, but it'll give me enough. I hit create, it goes away, and now you see that I have an entry over here. We're not done though, because if you start looking at some of the settings, you notice that they're not ideal. So for example, video memory set to 12 megs. That's not going to run Xterm very well. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to hit settings here. And by hitting settings, you're going to be able to deep dive more into tweaking that virtual computer. If you come over to system, again, you can change the RAM. If you shut down the computer because you realize that it's not going fast enough and you have more space, more RAM to give, you can alter that here. Coming over to the processor, depending on how many cores you have, you'll probably want to give it a few different cores. I'm going to go ahead and give mine 3 cores. The more cores you give it, the more it can do in parallel. Most operating systems nowadays are built expecting multi-core systems. So if you can afford it, give it to it. But again, there are ramifications on your host system. Acceleration will depend on what you've got on your BIOS or your UEFI, whether you have, or your CPU, depending on whether you have some of these extensions or not. Generally, VirtualBox is good enough to recognize what you can and can't do, so I don't generally touch anything there. Come over to display. This is a big one. I try to give it everything I got, primarily because I've got 2 video cards in SLI. I've got the GPU throughput to put into there. I'm not going to be running games on this. I've never really tried, but I can imagine it's not the best experience. That's why, like on OS 10, yeah, Parallels, if it's configured exactly right, it may work for some older games. Boot Camp tends to be better if you're on OS 10, but I generally, if you can avoid gaming in a virtualized system, then you're probably better off. I'm going to go ahead and enable 3D acceleration, though. That's going to pump some additional GPU power into my virtual machine. Now, one of the cool things that I did at one of my last startups is we had every single developer had a VirtualBox instance running on our bare metal servers in the office. And so we would set up these remote displays so that people can use a remote desktop protocol to essentially access the same virtual machine anywhere they are. We opened up the ports so that I could just open up RDP in Windows or whatever client that I wanted to use and go ahead and access the same machine, whether I'm in the office or I'm on the road or at home. So that's really cool. Unless you are going to be using that feature, though, make sure that enable server is off. I am going to go ahead and quit out my Deluge so that I can have a little more bandwidth. Video capture, again, you can save it to, you can save what you're actually doing in there out to a file. Pretty much just ignore that unless you, again, have a reason to copy it. All right, so storage. Here's the next big area that you need to pay attention to. You've got SATA and IDE controllers in here, which represent access to your hard drives and DVDs. You notice here's the demo VDI that I created earlier. Actual size is only 2 megs. It's dynamically allocated up to 64 gigs. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to where my CD drive is. You'll notice I've got this drop-down arrow here. This allows me to actually select which disk I want to be in my virtual computer. Now I could choose the host drive, which means it's going to connect my actual DVD drive on my desktop computer. Yeah, that's Deadpool. Yeah, I've also got a Deadpool shirt on right now. Deadpool is my favorite, so I blocked it with the mic. Anyways, yeah, I'm an absolute geek, and I'm not ashamed of it. So, I'm 30 some odd years old and still reading comic books every day with my kids. Yeah, I got 2 little daughters, and I got them into comic books now. So, all right, so I can actually connect it to, if I put like a real disc into my disk drive, I could actually access it from there. What I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to come to choose virtual CD DVD drive. I'm going to come to downloads, and I'm going to grab this ISO file. And that's going to essentially it's going to act like putting that disc, that CD or DVD into my virtual drive. Audio, self-explanatory. Network, for the most part, you can use either NAT or bridged. Depends on what you want to be doing. For now, you can just leave it to NAT, and if things don't work as well as you think they should, maybe switch over to bridged. I really leave that up to you. It depends on what you're going to be doing. Depends on what kind of environment you're in, whether you want to get your own IP address from the router or whether you want it your own little virtual LAN. That's up to you. Shared folders is another cool thing. You can actually set it up so that files on your host operating system are available to your guest operating system. So if I wanted to, be able to access files on my Windows desktop inside of my Linux desktop in my VirtualBox, I could. I'm not going to do that right now. Calling. No one ever calls my business phone. They'll call back if they need me. All right. So I got this all up. Oh, crud. Actually, hit cancel, didn't I? Yes, I did. So I'm going to go ahead and change this all back. I know where all this is because I have done this countless times before. That's net. I'm going to disable audio. Okay, we're going to hit OK this time. Now, when I hit start, it's going to actually boot up in a VirtualBox, which is essentially like, hey, you hit the power button on your computer. Notice that it went right into my Linux Mint operating system that I put into the virtual drive with the ISO, and is going to actually start walking me through installing Linux Mint on my machine. Depending on the speed of your system, depending on the speed of your how much resources you gave your VirtualBox, this could take a while, especially if you choose to allow it to download updates. I'm just going to kind of run through this pretty fast, and then while it's taking forever to install, I'll explain exactly what I'm doing. Now, hopefully this actually boots up. I don't know why Linux Mint's deciding not to start up. Obviously detected it. Let's see, reset. Let's see what's going on here. Hopefully there's not some kind of conflict. Start Linux Mint. We will find out if there's some issue with this ISO. Sometimes things change and they don't work. You gotta try again. Yeah, that's a normal message for Ubuntu. And an ISO. And black screen again. Oh, no, there we go. All right. So with the Linux Mint and a lot of different Ubuntu installations, it's going to go into what's called a live install mode or a live disk mode. Essentially what it's doing is it's putting all of the operating system into RAM and running it off the disk, which is really terrible for performance. It's useful if you need to do things like, hey, I forgot my Windows password and I've been locked out of the admin account. All right, well, you can go into, assuming that you don't have, like BitLocker on or something, you can use some of these live disks to edit your files and stuff. That's odd. One of my streams just crashed. Very strange. I wonder why that would have happened. Let me see what's going on. Status 2. That's strange. I wonder why. All right, now it seems to be back up. That was strange. It was, in the chat box, it kept telling me status 2, status 2. Disconnected, reconnected, but the other ones didn't seem to be affected. Oh, well. All right, so we'll continue on. All right, so what you're going to want to do now is you want to choose Install Linux Mint. And it's going to spin. Again, it's going to be very slow if you're running in a live mode. I'm going to go in English. That's the only language I can report to speak in some fashion, which obviously if you're watching the stream, you know that that's not necessarily true. All right. Generally, just erase the disk is fine. Remember, this is not your host file. Why not Ubuntu? Because I've had terrible experience with Ubuntu in VirtualBox, primarily because related to the Unity interface requiring a lot of 3D power that for whatever reason VirtualBox just was not able to virtualize very well. So I went with something with a different GUI on it. So I used Elementary OS for a while, and now I'm using Linux Mint. They are all Ubuntu based, which I guess is really like saying they're all Debian based. But it was mostly the prettiness. If I was going on bare metal, I would definitely put Ubuntu back on. I love Ubuntu, but unfortunately, every time I try to put it in VirtualBox, I try like every 6 months to see if things got better. I'm not saying it's Ubuntu. It's probably VirtualBox, but you know, it is what it is. So if you don't know what you're doing, erasing the disk and installing Linux Mint is fine. This is not going to touch your host operating system. So I've used VMware. I've used Parallels. I like VirtualBox primarily because it's free and it's open source. And everywhere I go, whenever I'm like, yeah, I'd like to put VMware or Parallels, whatever, and they start looking at licensing and everything else, it's like, no. So it's like, all right, well, can I use this absolutely free tool that won't do anything to your systems? And like, yeah, sure. Again, VMware Parallels are probably going to have better. They will have better performance. The main point of this stream is helping some of my university students start to do a better job start to understand some of the actual real world development techniques. Installing Node.js on a Windows machine when you're not entirely sure what you're doing can be kind of challenging for some beginning engineers. So this is why I say, all right, here, look, we're going to create a VirtualBox. We're going to use completely free tools. If you screw it up, you can delete it and start again. So, which is kind of the purpose of what I'm showing here. I'm in New Hampshire, which is close enough to New York for all intents and purposes. English, I'm not going to detect the layout. I know that it's in English US. My name will be Kevin. We'll call this demo. Username, we'll call Kevin. I'll put in a really bad, weak password. I'm going to choose a login automatically because I'm probably going to just delete this box pretty quickly. For security purposes, if you're doing real world stuff, you probably don't want to do that. You probably want to require your password to log in and encrypt your home folder. But for what I'm demoing this afternoon, I'm definitely not. It's not anything to really worry too much about. So now it's going to start installing the files. It's as far as Linux Mint is concerned, the OS is, or the VirtualBox machine is its own computer. It doesn't know that it's in a virtualized machine. So if you think of like something like DigitalOcean or Amazon, the EC2, what they're really doing at this point is they have these massive servers and they're using virtualization software to kind of break them up into their own, what are called VPSs, virtual private servers. And they're doing something very similar to this. They're using better tools, obviously, for performance reasons and stuff like that. But when you go to DigitalOcean and you say, all right, give me a brand new droplet. Well, droplet's what they call a server. What they're essentially doing is they're taking a chunk of one of their actual bare metal servers and giving it to you and essentially installing an operating system on there and installing an operating system on there that thinks that it's in its own computer. So really, for all intents and purposes, you have your own separate server. However, that's what allows you to scale up. At one point, if you start off with a 512 meg RAM server and you're like, I need more space, and you say, all right, give me 2 gigs. Well, all they're doing is changing the settings on their actual servers. Now, obviously, it's a lot more complicated than that behind the scenes. But in a nutshell, that's kind of what's going on when you're dealing with these cloud systems, when you're dealing with these cloud servers. Now, what we're doing is we're taking our desktop bare metal servers and we are creating separate, smaller computers on here that we can spin up, resize, drop down whenever we want. The really cool thing about that is if I, make a mistake, especially if you're trying to learn, DevOps, you're trying to learn Linux systems administration or anything like that, you accidentally delete your entire user folder. And I'm not talking your home folder, I'm talking /user. Not a big deal. Delete the server or delete the VirtualBox and spin up a new one. There's a lot of great learning opportunity here. And when I'm doing my hiring, I always, ask, all right, you have a brand new project on a brand new computer. What do you do to get going? And I look for something like, yeah, I set up, virtualization, or I set up, like Docker, depending on what the actual project is. There's a couple different answers there, but the key is I'm looking for something where they can spin stuff up and spin stuff down. So while this is installing, what I'm going to do after it installs is I'm going to have to shut down the machine. I'm going to install what are called guest editions. Guest editions essentially add some driver support, some software support to the operating system once it's installed. That helps it perform a lot better on a virtual system. There are things that you can do. It's like if you've ever used Boot Camp on OS X and you install the drivers after Windows is installed. It's because there are things that you can do to improve performance. So the guest editions, they're not usually a separate download. You may have to download a different version if you've been doing it for a while and things get out of date. But if you've been following along or you are watching this video after the stream, you can definitely you should have them just fine. I'm going to hit restart now. It's going to shut down the computer and it's going to tell me to eject my disk. Obviously, it's a virtual disk, so I don't necessarily need to worry about that. I'm just going to hit enter. And you're going to see that it's restarting. And we'll wait for it to boot up. And we should notice that performance is going to be a lot better, but still not quite where we want it to be if we're going to actually be doing software development. So I'll just sit here and wait for a second, which is really awesome, entertaining streaming, I'm sure. Waiting. All right, we're up. So we're in software rendering mode. You'll notice that I don't have this install disk option anymore. That's because here we are in the actual operating system. What this software rendering is essentially saying is, hey, something's not right with the computer that you're on. So that's a great question, Blarg. With a single cloud server, is it accessible to multiple people at the same time? Yes. Depends on what you're trying to do, though. You're both trying to edit the same file. You're going to run into conflicts, but you can definitely, SSH in as root from 2 different accounts or from 2 different computers. You can have 2 people SSHing in as root. You can have 2 people SSHing in as different accounts, depending on how the server is set up. The big limitation is just going to be, what are you trying to do? If you're both trying to edit the same index file or the same home file, whatever, you're going to run into conflicts there. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that it could, depending on how it's set up, it could terminate the other person's connection. So if you're going to have multiple people accessing the same server at the same time, probably best to give a user add command, get a couple different people in there, and that way you have less of a chance of stepping on each other's toes. Generally what I do and what I recommend for all my engineers is, all right, you got a single cloud server each. I have my QA, my staging, my production. Each of those has one login, and those are only for deploy. The only time someone should be getting on there is if there's an issue or if there's a deploy. One of the big trends in cloud computing recently has been something known as cattle, not cats. Sometimes cattle, not pets. I've seen it both ways. And essentially what that means is the servers need to be thought of more as a utility than as something that you spent a lot of time handcrafting. You'll get to that later. For me, I use Ansible and Docker to do that. So like 4 a.m. every morning, I shut down every single server, delete it, and rebuild them all just to make sure that I can. And that way, if there's an issue. Yeah, exactly. So if it's just like if 2 people open a file in Windows and they both hit save, there'll be a conflict. Now, sometimes the operating system will say, you can't do that. The file's locked, and depending on what you're doing to edit that file. Linux tries to be pretty good about that. You'll see, like if you're using Vim, you'll see a .swap file, but it really just depends on what they're trying to do on the server. All right, so moving along, let's install the guest editions. Again, come up to devices, and you can do things like put in different DVD files if you have them. Some really cool stuff is once you get the guest editions installed, you can have drag and drop in a shared clipboard. So if I copy something on my host operating system, my Windows machine or whatever, I can copy and paste it over into my Linux machine. So, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Insert Guest Edition CD image. It's going to say, hey, do you actually want to run this? I'm going to hit run because I know what I'm doing. It's going to ask for my super weak password. And it's going to say, hey, do you want to install this stuff? I'm going to say yes. Now, one of the things that it's telling me is that, hey, there's already some stuff in here that looks like the VirtualBox guest editions. I tend to overwrite those anyway, primarily because there tends to be issues in between versions, between what comes with the OS and what version of VirtualBox and guest editions you're running. Essentially, you can think of this as adding additional Linux headers and additional equivalent of drivers. Again, I'm trying to keep this real simple and dumbed down without diving too much into it, primarily because I want this to have a wide reach. All right, so everything's done. What I tend to do at this point is I am going to come down to menu and I'm going to hit restart. And I'm going to let it restart one more time with the new additions installed. And the very next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to install NodeJS on my computer. Now, as with most things in web development, as I'm sure those in the chat will know, or those who have done any web development will know, or those who are about to do web development will find out, there are about 1,000 different ways to do almost anything. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to install it using apt. Now, the most correct version, or the most correct way to install Node.js is to actually go to the Node.js website. And I'll just type it in. Yahoo's the default now, apparently. Come to nodejs.org. Now you can download it and install it. If you are, just trying to get started and you don't really want to deal with, installing Node.js and then putting it in the path file, handling all of that, what I tend to do is I use a setup file that they offer online. Now, one of the things is that curl is sometimes installed in a Linux machine and sometimes isn't. It depends on which version and what, if you're on the server. I found that like Ubuntu server usually has it. Curl is a way of doing web requests. It's a way of connecting to a remote service and getting the response back. You can do gets, you can do posts, you can do a lot of different things there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use it to download a file. Now, when I typed in curl, it told me that it's not installed. What I need to do now is I need to install the curl program. The way I'm going to do that is using a package manager. A package manager is just a way for Linux to, or for an operating system to say, okay, look, here's a bunch of different packages. If you install it through a package manager, we'll configure it. We'll make sure the dependencies are there. We'll make sure that everything is hunky-dory. And the way that you do the package manager in Ubuntu-based systems or Debian-based systems is called apt, A-P-T. Now, apt is a bunch of different commands. So, for example, apt get install will install a package if you know the name of it. Now, one of the problems, though, is that sometimes you need special permissions. You need administrator permissions. In Linux, root is God. If you are root, you can do anything to the operating system for the most part. That includes really bad things. So in general, you don't want to be root unless you absolutely have to. So for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually do sudo apt get install curl. What this is going to do is the sudo command says, okay, run whatever's after this as if it was root. That way I don't have to change into the root user so that I accidentally, fat finger a command and delete my entire operating system. Instead, what this is going to do is it's going to say, okay, we're going to go to root for this command only and then come right back to whatever user I was logged in before. So if I run this, it's going to ask me for my password and it's going to start looking for the package. It tells me that it found it. It's saying, all right, look, here are the extra packages I need to install for this command. Here's what's actually going to be installed, and this one's going to be upgraded. It's going to ask me, it's going to tell me how much of the archives it needs to pull and the disk space it's going to use. So what you're going to want to do is just hit yes, and it's going to start going through downloading the system. Now if I run curl, you'll see that I'm getting an error. It's saying, hey, curl is here. I know that you're calling me, but you're not telling me what you want me to do. Well, what I actually want to do is I want to, call out to a website. If I want to go to Google, curl, www.google.com. All right, what's that? Well, that's the actual HTML. If you type in google.com in your browser, that's what it's going to return. So what we're going to actually do is we're going to curl, as in we're going to get a Node.js installer file that's going to handle everything for us. And the way that we do that is we're going to run sudo curl. I'm going to do -sl, which are just some flags for curl telling it how to understand the next command. And it's going to be https:// it's deb.nodesource.com/setup. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a up and down pipe. And what that does is it says, okay, take whatever was right before that and pipe it into the next command. So now I'm going to pipe it into bash and tell bash to read in from the standard in. Don't worry if you don't understand all of that too much. The big thing to understand is that what I'm saying is, hey, grab this file and run it locally on my machine. If I run it, it's going to start getting everything that I need. It's going to run through some commands for Node.js to get installed on my local machine. This way, I don't have to worry about the different dependencies. I don't have to worry about, all of the different gotchas that may come up if I was, installing a tar archive. Now, one thing that you will notice is that it's saying, all right, to install Node.js 0.10. That's an old version. I think the current version is 12 dot something or 0.12 dot something. But if you're just getting started and you're trying to play around and learn Node, then you can definitely feel free to get started with Node.js 10. As you get more familiar, more comfortable with it, then you can start worrying about, okay, am I using the latest features or whatnot? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do exactly what it tells me to do, which is right here, apt get install Node.js. And this will install Node.js and npm. You'll see that it's asking, hey, do you want to use 20 megs of your space? I'll say, yeah, that's fine. It's going to download it. It's going to get all the other repositories. It's going to put it all together and start installing it. Now, if I type in node, I have a node prompt. And I can put in just JavaScript here. I can say var x equals abc, and then console.log x. And I see my ABC. So I have my node console. I've also got this thing called npm. What npm is it stands for Node Package Manager. Pretty sure. I think they may have changed that abbreviation, or I might be wrong. But essentially, it's a package manager, which we were just talking about with Ubuntu's apt. The nice thing about npm is that you can set up these projects and say, okay, look, I need the MySQL driver. I need the Twilio API. I need, the crypto library. And as long as those are in a file, npm knows how to go get those files, get them installed, and get them built into your system. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to build a very, very basic, and I really do mean basic, Express server that is going. So what is Express? Express is a routing library that allows Node.js to essentially serve files. What I'm going to do is I'm going to build a very basic server here so that I can show you guys kind of how to get started with Node.js. Now, this is not a Node.js tutorial. I'm kind of at my time limit anyway, because I do have classes that I need to get prepared for, but I am going to go ahead and show you some of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit mkdir, which stands for makedir, or it stands for make directory. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a new folder wherever you are. And I'm just going to call it node demo. Now, I don't have Vim installed, so I'm going to go ahead and install a couple tools that I always like to use. I like to have Git installed. I like to have Vim. I like to have Screen, and I like to have HTOP. Some of those are already installed. They're just personal preferences. Depending on what you're trying to do, you may have different tools installed. You'll probably want a better editor than Vim. I know I'm going to start a religious war by saying a better editor than Vim. I've actually fallen in love with VS Code recently. I've started using that almost exclusively rather than over Sublime. I used to be a big Sublime guy, but Visual Studio Code has been awesome. Man, why Yahoo? So here's Visual Studio Code. Download it. You'll use it. You can use it as an editor. I love it. I use it for my TypeScript. I use it for a lot of my coding. For today, I'm just going to use Vim. Yeah, we'll see, because I haven't actually tried this out to see how it works in a Linux environment. Like I said, I do almost everything on my OS 10 box now. Docker. But Docker's a little more advanced than this. So, all right. Actually, I'm going to make this full screen. All right, so I've got Visual Studio Code installed. I'm going to go ahead and close out Firefox. All right. So what I'm going to do is with my terminal open, make this a little bigger. I'm going to hit clear. I'm going to CD, that stands for change directory. I'm going to go into my node demo. I'm going to hit npm init for npm init. That's going to initialize a brand new node project for me to use. If I hit enter, it's going to ask me a couple questions. What's in parentheses is going to be your default settings. So if that makes sense, go ahead and leave it. because I'm not really doing anything special here, I'm just going to leave these all pretty much blank. Call it index.js, that's fine. Ignore the test command, no git repository, no keywords, author, I don't care, license, that's fine. Hit yes. If we open up that directory now, oopsies, I hit file, open folder, and I come up to my home folder. Here's the node demo. You'll notice that I now have a file called package.json. This file will allow me to say, okay, hey, here are the actual dependencies for my file or for my project. So I'm going to just show you an example. I'm going to hit npm install grunt --save. What that's going to do is going to contact the npm service, is going to find the grunt module. It's going to find out which files the grunt or which modules grunt depends on and install them all locally. If you come over to your package.json file, now notice that you have dependencies listed, and here's grunt. You'll also now have a node modules directory, and you'll see that the grunt folder in there has its own node modules. This is how Node handles all of its dependencies. The nice thing is, because I have that dependency listed here, if I delete this folder, so I completely get rid of that node modules. If I come into my file and I say npm install, what it's going to do is it's going to look at my package.json file, go through all of the dependencies, and try to install each one. So now you notice that I have my node modules back, and I've got this grunt subdirectory in here. So that's why it's very important that all of your dependencies are in your package.json file so that you can easily rebuild your system from source control. Generally, you don't want to check in your node modules. That's going to be a huge directory. So if you can, try to just put your dependencies in your package.json and install from there. One last thing. I'm not going to have time to do the Express server because I do have to jet. In the node demo, if you add a new file and, oopsies, not in node modules, call it index.js. Just call it index.js. You can come in here and you can write your basic JavaScript. If you're learning JavaScript, if you're learning how things work, you can try, you can enter your code here. So let's say I had var my add. I say it's a function that takes in num1, num2, and I do a return num1 plus num2. I can now say console.log my add, and we'll say 2 and 3. So what I've done is I've created a simple JavaScript file that has one function. All right, it has one function at the global namespace level that says, all right, number one is going to take 2 parameters, num1, num2, and it's just going to add them. If I wanted to actually run that, I would just type node and then the file name, which in this case is index.js, and it'll give me the output. That's where Node that's all Node really does, is it reads in JavaScript, it parses your JavaScript files, and it runs your JavaScript. The history of Node.js is essentially the Google Chrome V8 JavaScript engine was ported to the server, and it allowed web developers who were, writing JavaScript on the front end and then something like PHP or Python on the back end to use the same language on both the server and on the front end. Also, it's pretty fast. It's pretty easy to scale with the whole type of async callback. It's kind of beyond the scope of what I wanted to cover today, but there are tons of great resources out there for learning Node.js, for getting started with things like Express, building a very basic, very basic API. Now, one thing is that Node does not come bundled with Express, so you'd have to install it just like you would any other module. So, npm install --save Express. And that's going to actually download the Express library, or the Express library we'll go with. and put it into your node modules, you'll notice that my package.json file now also has express there listed. This number here is it's supposed to be for Semver. So I know some packages don't follow the Semver standard, but essentially it's just saying, hey, get me anything 4.13.1 up that's non-breaking, which is what the little caret means. Again, you take it with a grain of salt, but if you need an exact version, you could do an exact version. I don't recommend that. Generally, if you just want the most recent version, you can go with the dependency that's listed by default. Yeah, so I guess in my next stream, I'll cover Express and Grunt.js and getting that all up and running. But unfortunately, I've just run out of time today, and I do need a ditch. I was really only planning on taking about 35 minutes today, and we're at a little over an hour, I think, not including the crash I had earlier. So, all right. Well, are there any questions, any issues before I cut off for the day? Hope you guys picked something up. Again, the nice thing about VirtualBox. Oh, one last thing on VirtualBox. Hit this X. I can choose save the machine state. What that's going to do is it's going to save the current memory down to the host operating system, so that all I have to do is, if I want to pick up right back where I was, is you'll notice it says demo saved. I double click. It's going to restart my virtual machine and leave it exactly where it was. So essentially what that's going to do is it allows me to shut off for the evening, turn off my laptop, do whatever I want, and then pull it up later. Or if I'm not going to be working on this for another week or so, I can close it down and I can open it up in a week. There's a lot of things we didn't cover. You can do, you come to, I'm actually going to shut this down. See the machine state. But if you come over to the VirtualBox manager, you can do things like export your appliance, which will allow you to send your VirtualBox computer, for lack of a better term, to someone else. So if you both wanted to use the same, basic setup, you could. Now, I do have to caution that doing so, it's a big file, and you got to be careful about things like, having multiple MAC addresses that are the same on the same network, and you can get into some weird issues like that. But, if you needed to transfer it onto a external hard drive, or someone's going to use it on a different network, you can definitely pass that around. The other thing to remember is that there are a lot of other tools that you can use, Docker, Ansible, configuration management. Again, the whole point of this stream was mostly to just have a couple very basic examples of getting started with virtualization and what you can do with it. I installed Node.js. You could put LAMP on there. You could put, Nginx. You could put Ruby, Python. I've done it all. Essentially, if you could do it on a real Linux machine, you can do it to some limited extent. Like, I wouldn't run Hadoop necessarily on a VirtualBox cluster for performance reasons, but, that's what it is. I'm sorry for the guys that just joined the room. I'm about to log off for a bit. I don't know if I'll be back on tonight after I teach, but hope you guys had a good one. I hope you guys picked up something useful, and if not, definitely let me know if there's something you want me to cover. If there's something you guys are looking for, and I'll definitely go from there in future streams. But for now, I must bid adieu. Thanks everybody for watching. Have a good one.